Kraus or Krause or?
Kraus.
Kraus. With Commissioner Kraus. We are just one short, so anybody who would happen to be watching, if you're watching and you're not us, you should probably apply to be on this board. So, anyway, bring us to order. We're all here. I would entertain a motion to adopt our very brief agenda.
I'll make the motion to approve the agenda. I'll second.
Excellent. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, and the minutes. It's the most important thing that we're doing today for sure. We have to approve these minutes. I would entertain a motion for that as well. And Ben, did you have something?
I did not.
Okay.
A motion to approve the minutes.
All right, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Great. All those in favor?
Aye.
Although I don't know if we have to do that. But anyway, so moving on, we are looking at what we wanted to look at. What we asked about last time, which is great. Excited that we get to do that. And did you want to?
Should we jump right in?
Just jump right in, I guess.
So
Yeah.
these two issues, residential use in the CI zone and the commercial setback from residential property have been kind of poking their heads up from time to time this past, I'm not sure, year and a half, 2 years. Seems like it's more than a few times that they've come up. And of course, they're really quite directly related to each other because when they've come up, it's generally been through the idea of developing more residential properties and whether or not this setback is an issue with that.
Yeah.
So I thought, let's take a step back from this and look at residential use in the CI zone, how it's happening right now, and hopefully have a longer conversation about how we might be able to accommodate more residential development and if the CI zone has any spaces where that might be appropriate.
Okay.
And then also we can talk about the commercial setback from residential property. So I think maybe you talked a little bit about that at your last meeting. And I did poke around a little bit at what other cities have to say about this. So just a quick reminder, in our zoning ordinance, there is a 50-foot setback requirement for commercial uses from residentially zoned property. And what that means is when you've got commercial and residential zoned properties close to each other, then that 50-foot setback is enacted on the commercially zoned property when somebody wants to build a building. And if you've got a very large piece of property, it's not a problem, but if you've got a 100-foot wide piece of property, then it's pretty strict. And then we also have a very complex interaction between our residential and our commercial properties, which I'm just going to put the zoning map up on the screen for everybody.
Great. Thanks.
And we don't have to blow this up, but you can just know that the pink areas are residential properties and all of the other colors have some commercial uses that are allowed in them. And if you look at the mixed use in the Highway 61 zones and the commercial industrial zone, they just kind of worm their way through along the width of Highway 61, and there's a kind of a sawtooth shape to how they interact with the residential properties. When those interactions occur at a street right-of-way, well, the 50-foot setback's not an issue because the 66-foot wide street right-of-way kind of takes care of the whole need. When those interactions occur in the mid-block, when there's a few of those on here, then we've got the headstrom variance question, where their lot is zoned commercial, their neighbor's lot, which is directly adjacent to theirs, is zoned residential, and that 50-foot setback takes up, well, virtually the entire buildable space on their property. It hasn't affected the development of our internal residential zones because, of course, that was mainly built out before zoning was an issue here. So what do other cities do about this? I couldn't find any other cities that have a 50-foot setback for commercial uses from residential properties. I didn't see one anywhere, and I looked at a dozen or so. other cities, the ones up and down the shore here, a couple of other small towns in the state. And it turns out that more common is they just use the geographic locations of where the zones are to take care of this issue. There aren't as many interactions necessarily between the commercial and the residential zones, or where there's street rights ways in between. And so when I did find language that talked about commercial setback from residential zone properties, it was almost always 15 feet or even less, and it was generally just rear and side yard exceptions. So they didn't worry about the front yards. They only talked about rear and side yards, and they didn't have a 50-foot setback. They had a 15-foot or even less. And I think the most common thing I found was just nothing about this in the zoning ordinances of other cities. They didn't talk about this. There wasn't a separate setback for the commercial uses. It was just, didn't seem to be an issue for them.
And one thing I was thinking, as because I just pulled up a few other towns as well, just kind of looking for anything. And one thing I came around to was our performance standards is kind of what I think are taking care of the issues that might arise when you have a house or a residential place near any kind of a business that's doing things. It seemed like those types of issues might be taken care of by that, and this 50-foot setback may not be necessary.
So that's a great segue to what I wanted to talk about. If we're going to consider changing or removing the setback, I think it's always a good idea to back up and think about what its purpose was or is, what it means to us, what use it provides before we get rid of it. Because all we know recently is how it makes things more complicated. And of course, that's been true, but it was put in place for a reason. We don't want to just walk past that reason. And so if folks have some thoughts about that, I'd love to hear from you if there is something we need to keep in mind about why that's an important rule to have that setback.
Can I just ask, Mike, has it come up in a positive way, I guess, in the last 20 years? Like, has there been a time when it was like, oh, well, glad we have that 50-foot setback that prevented X from interfering with Y? Has this, I mean, I know I'm just asking your brain to come up with it, but
there hasn't been, and think about why that probably is.
Well,
zoning isn't something that people spend a lot of time looking at or thinking about. And it's generally just kind of taken for granted by most folks. It's complicated, it's boring, they don't want to think about it. And so what you're saying is, would someone be happy enough to actually come and say to us that they were happy about something that didn't happen, that they probably never knew was even being considered because no one talked to them about it.
Right.
So it's not surprising to me that it hasn't come up as boy, I'm really glad that was there. I do think if there were a lot of new commercial buildings built next to residential, that there would be some pushback on that. And there certainly is some pushback on that when you think about some of the commercial uses that have been built in the mixed-use zones, where there are a lot of residential uses right now.
yeah.
And people want to know, is there going to be a lot of parking next to me? That building seems really tall. Is it going to be in my sight lines? All the typical questions that we get when we talk about variances or conditional uses. But I'm not sure that the setback itself is I can't think of a time when somebody had to comply with it and did.
Okay.
Seems like the only time it's ever been an issue is in a few lots where the commercial zone is adjacent to the residential zone, and it's not a new building, right? It's a single family home built in the 60s before we had zoning, and so it's not the same kind of question as putting a new residential lot right next to an existing commercial structure, and suddenly there's a setback on them that wasn't there before.
Do we have a record of what the property was like for the Bally blacksmith shop? What size property it was on originally? Do we know that?
The one across the street from
Yeah.
here?
I mean, they don't have any kind of a setback at all, and it could just be because of the streets and stuff, but I'm just curious,
Yeah.
as a historical input, what the original property shape was.
I don't have any information on that. I suspect it was very close to what it is now. This plat for downtown, like the arrangement of the streets and blocks, was the original village plat. So that is from a very long time ago, probably before the blacksmith shop was built even.
Well, and did it have residential around it? You
I
know?
don't think they had, well, they didn't, I know they didn't have zoning. And until 1971, we didn't have a zoning ordinance. And so most of the downtown was developed and redeveloped before 1971. And I'm sure there was residential uses down here, and I don't know that they cared about it. So if you think about some of the residential uses we know about down here, there's a house that the Historical Society has a museum in, well, that used to be a house people lived in, right? There are other people that live in commercial buildings up and down around here. So that we know that there are ways to have residential uses mixed
Well, and there's
with
a
commercial.
residential house between Sydney's and
Yeah.
whatever there. I mean, that's peculiar. But I'm sure it's grandfathered in, you know.
No, they got a permit. That's what made me join the
Oh,
zoning.
interesting, interesting,
It
okay.
was a conversation.
So then,
Anyway.
where might this 50-foot setback
Yeah.
come into play? Like back up a little, computer. All right, thank you. You've got these interactions again here where the commercial industrial zone abuts residential property. And so in particular, this chunk of, we'll take a look at the actual map. All through here, you can see, pretty significant undeveloped commercial property and abutting residentially zoned property. So even back here where these lots are residentially zoned, inaccessible and unlikely to ever be built on, and there's a big ravine coming through here, for instance, there's still would be a 50-foot setback from the north line of these properties, and it's actually even a little bit below the north line because the zoning is a little bit below where those property lines are, that there would be a 50-foot setback for if someone was going to do commercial here, or if they were going to do commercial here. So if there was commercial development, I think it would definitely affect some of this area. If we scroll on over to the east side of town, this chunk of the commercial industrial in here, as you can see, is pretty well built out already, commercially in particular, but there's also a lot of residential uses in here. And then this section above County Road 7 is all zoned residential, and a lot of residential uses exist in it right now. So that street right-of-way probably takes care of most of it. We've got some residential uses down here and some residential uses over here, and then all of this commercial in between them. And because those residential uses in that little triangle exist mainly on commercially zoned property, there isn't that 50-foot setback. But as the residential zone pushes into this area, and it seems like there's pressure for it to do that, that would encumber these. And although some of these lots are quite large, a 50-foot setback from, two directions on the lot would put a lot of pressure on it. So, what would happen? Oh,
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm a little confused. So those homes there
yeah.
that are there and they're in a commercial lot, are you telling me there's 50 feet between?
Not at all.
No.
No.
And then how did they get in there?
They're not zoned residential.
The setback is from residential zoning, not residential use.
But you can build a house in a commercial.
Well,
Lot.
it's permitted in there. I mean, you can get it in there, but the problem that we discovered was the 50-foot setback that would come into play after the fact. So
But-
if they wanted to build after.
And these are conditional uses.
Yeah.
There's been an ability to do some residential use in this commercial industrial zone with conditional uses, and it's been accessed a lot. That it's just another symptom, I think, that shows us there's pressure to do more residential in this than commercial. If you think about the last time that new commercial development occurred in the CI zone, it doesn't happen that often. I mean, I'm not sure I can even remember what the latest one is.
So you said there's a difference between the zoning and the zoning use?
And the use. So
Can
let's
you
just look
explain that?
in particular at this house right here. As soon as my. So this is a residential, single-family residential home right here. It's got a driveway on County Road 7. I mean, it's clearly just a residential lot, and it's being used residentially, and yet the zoning is CI. So
That's a
right
big lot, isn't it?
here, we've got a CI zone of property that's being used commercially, and it's adjacent to residential. So that might be close to 50 feet right there if there was a setback requirement, but there's not, because both of these lots are zoned CI. It's just the typical side yard setback requirement instead. And then you can see the same thing over here. These are all being used residentially. They're just little, used to be motel units, and now they're being rented out as residences.
Yeah, log
And, you know,
cabins.
clearly this is right up against this property line. Half of this property is being used commercially. This is all commercial use right here, and yet, and you know, this use all through here, even though it's not a structure, it's a commercial use to have your yard full of your equipment and tools and everything else. Would, if this was zoned residentially, would have to be set back 50 feet, and it's not. And so you can see there are, even though this is closer than that 50-foot setback would allow, there was still the market to create that housing, and it's been there for some time, and it's successful, and you know, it serves a role. And so I think that might be another reason why it's not very common to see that big setback in other zoning. Is it's okay if the uses conflict a little bit. It just creates a different character of residential use. That, you know, kind of gives me mixed feelings, but on the other hand, we need that housing that's right there.
The reason that strategy of using conditional use for to establish residential use on a commercial industrial property, the reason that didn't work for the Hamilton's Habitat was specifically because they were subdividing and selling those individually, right? It wasn't just a single-family home going on a lot.
Right.
Right.
So could they have gone through the process of subdividing it, leave it commercially zoned,
Probably.
and then have each lot come and get a conditional use permit for a single-family home? I mean, those things are all possible, but that's a big risk for somebody to take, to lay out the cash to actually purchase a property and hope that all those things are approved, because any one of them could be, you know, we could say no, and then.
Well, what's the tax rate for commercial industrial versus residential zoning anyway for a $100,000 home?
I'm sure that the taxes are unaffected by the zoning when it's developed like
Okay.
this. Because they're going to look, the assessor's going to look at the use more than the zoning.
Okay.
When it's already developed. You know, if they're looking at a vacant lot, they're going to value that based on what you could build there. But when they're looking at that home, I don't think the fact that it's commercially zoned affects their taxes very much.
Yeah.
But for us, of course, commercial is going to pay a higher tax rate. I don't know that that means it provides more taxes to the city, because the state takes a big cut when we talk about commercial rates.
Okay.
What size is a regular residential lot in the city?
Yeah. Boy, we went through and
Have
studied
one.
that. So let's see, we've got,
Well, good.
this one is one of my favorites. You got this little computer. It's so small you can't even see it. I'm pretty sure that lot is going to be a 25-foot lot.
I think I lived there.
there you go, right there. This beautiful 25-foot lot, and then right over here you've got one that's about 150. So typical is really, really hard to say. When we studied the residential supply, we
So-
found that there was anywhere from 5,000 to 20,000 was pretty typical.
So we haven't set a particular residential lot size.
No,
We don't say what they have to be. We do have
Well,
minimums. The minimums used to be, for a long time, 75 feet wide and 120 feet deep and 10,000 square feet. And they're not anymore. Now you can do much, much smaller lots. You can do 40-foot lots and 5,000 square feet. So, yeah, I'm not sure how to link that back to this commercial setback conversation.
So we had the colors up there. What was the bright blue?
This one or this one? The whale tail
The dark
here, or
navy.
The dark one? Yeah, that is mixed use. So this is, this blue, yellow, and dark red color all used to be the same zoning until about 15 years ago. And then they were split into 3 different zones. And the reason behind that was they really have very different characteristics how they're developed. This downtown zoning is almost exclusively commercial style, even though there are residences in it. It's mostly commercial style. This highway corridor has some houses in it and some buildings in it, and most of the buildings are not quite as up against the property line as the Bolly's blacksmith shop. They've got a little more space. It's a little more like you'd expect along a roadway, and then this blue area has a much higher rate of commercial or of residential use, and there's just a lot of single-family homes in there, and less commercial uses. But these folks had the rights to develop commercially, and so we created this zone to really allow that mixing to occur. So let's take the step back now from the 50-foot setback, and let's keep it in mind, but let's go to the conversation about what about residential development in commercial zones? So here we have now the city with the darker red outline basically being the commercial industrial zone, and the brighter red outlines inside of it being either vacant or currently being used as residential properties. So you can see that on both the west and the east chunks of this zoning, there's actually quite a bit of either intermixing or potential to do residential development. Anywhere that's inside of that bright red line, you could potentially do residential development if the zoning would allow it. You can see on the west side, there's a lot more, particularly above the highway, that's either already being used residentially or isn't developed yet and could potentially be developed residentially. And although a lot of these properties on the south side are developed and being used somewhat commercially, I think there's some potential on the south side as well. This piece here that I've highlighted is the one that the city owns, for instance. And this is residential right here, although I didn't highlight it because it's mostly not in the zone. And that, of course, it's all residential down here. This is kind of a little residential and a little commercial. It's kind of hard to tell sometimes, but I think you could probably draw that as residential. This is residential right here, although it's not in the all the way in the commercial zone. So there's a lot of intermixing.
Well, where WTIP is,
Yeah.
do they have a 50 setback, 50 feet setback?
This is all inside of these two lines here, zoned commercial. So even though WTIP's neighbor is a single-family home, at least this portion of the lot is zoned commercial up here. And it's not, they don't have a 50-foot setback from their south lot line because right on the other side of it is commercially zoned property, not residentially zoned property.
But that looks like a small lot. I mean, we're talking, it is commercial, isn't it?
Yeah,
WTIP?
WTIP is commercial.
Yeah.
So their setback is 10 feet from the road and 15 feet from the side, and I'm sure they're nothing anywhere close to that. And yet, When was this building built? I'm not sure. What was the setback
Oh,
when
it was built since I moved here.
I'm not sure.
It was,
Did they get a variance for it? You know, this still has the picture of the motel, and you can see that the
Right.
motel was in the same place. It was very close to the property line. It was not as much of an issue. On the north side of the highway, you can see there's a couple of pockets of commercial development, but otherwise it's almost exclusively residentially developed or vacant. And even some of these vacant lots, you know, there's a house here and then a bunch of vacant lot behind it. This is a house right here, and although this is all vacant and could potentially be developed commercially, it could also be residential. This is the back half of the Blue Moose's. There's houses back there, and
Yes.
all of this stuff here is really undeveloped and could potentially be commercial or residentially developed. But if you think about the types of developments that we've been seeing pressure for, we're looking for places to stick these residential developments.
what about a commercial place, zoned commercial, that's for sale? Is that possible to make that into a residential?
It depends.
Viking Plumbing?
Yeah, so that is the question that we just had posed to us. And that wasn't the whole property, just the north half of it. And could the Hamiltons purchase the north half and have it rezoned into residential? And I think what the point of this conversation is there another way for us to make that allowable so that they can do what they want? And so is the 50-foot setback the problem? And if it goes away, then we can see more residential development in there? Or is it a bigger problem where we're looking at the whole CI zone and thinking there needs to be another path for housing to be developed in the CI zone? And what type of housing would we want to see in the CI zone? So let's just look at the rest of this over here, because this is, again, this side of the zoning is, you can see a lot more commercially developed. There's a lot of commercial structures over here
Yeah.
already being used. But there is some of it, particularly right here, Gopher Cabins area, and then the neighbors
Which
before
is no
down for
longer
Circle.
Gopher.
Yeah, but this is all residential, right?
Right.
And it's residential on the west of it as well.
Yes.
So that there is some of this intermixing over here, but there's also a lot more commercial developed property already. So when I think about is there opportunities to put more housing, it seems more natural to me to look at this side of the city where there's a lot more vacant land and a lot less already developed commercial uses, and so less conflicts that we would need those performance standards to mitigate, like smells and
But
junk
you understand
and
that
noises.
there's a transportation problem. That over by the Viking Plumbing, you're a little closer to town than way out here.
A little closer, although I would say at Viking Plumbing, you don't have a sidewalk until you get over here.
Well,
And
that could
when
be
you're
changed.
talking about all of this up here,
Yeah,
it's pretty well connected pedestrian-wise to the downtown. There's this hill, which is kind of a pain, but
There's
if
the
you
train.
don't have a car, it's very feasible to get yourself downtown and back all seasons. We're maintaining that trail
okay.
for pedestrians. And so that, I think that's a good issue to bring up, and it's another reason why this side makes a little more sense to me to think about where residential uses might fit than the other side.
So we're maintaining the north side? Is that what you're saying?
Well,
So
this is the
sidewalk
west, like the west end of the commercial zoning more than the east end. So again, I'll just zoom out so you can see
Yeah.
that both of them.
I guess I was just wondering over on this end, on that west end,
Yeah,
we're maintaining the sidewalk there on the north side?
no,
No, it's on the south side.
No.
Okay. That's what
yeah,
I thought.
yeah, we're plowing the south side, not the north side. So, I think we've got a couple of different paths that might be worth spending some time on.
Okay.
One being, do we rezone some of this and just zone it R1 and, make it really easy for folks to develop it residentially? If we were going to go down that road, then we'd want to invite these folks to talk to us about it and see if that's something that they're interested in. I think even 2 or 3 years ago, that probably wouldn't have been a very exciting idea for folks. And for most of the time we've had zoning here, commercial property is more valuable. And you wouldn't want to downzone to residential because you might lose some of that potential value in your property. I'm not sure that's been true for a long time, but I think it's been kind of thought of that way.
Yeah.
Well, if it's empty, there's not a lot of value there.
Reason why you wouldn't establish a mixed-use zone in that area on the north side of 61?
I think that's another option, is to say, is there a new zone? I probably wouldn't suggest using our existing mixed-use zoning,
Yeah.
but do we create a new zone where we do a different kind of mixed-use zoning, where this blue one that we looked at before is really very similar to downtown zoning. We don't have setbacks, we don't have minimum lot sizes, the list of uses allows a lot of different commercial zones, and so it's designed for small lots and a lot of density. Whereas up here, even where we are built out, the lots are pretty big, and the density is only when you've got multiple units together, like the hotel-looking building or something like that. So yeah, could we look at a new zone up here that would make it easier for residential, but we could still think about ways to mitigate, having some kind of setbacks in between, or limiting the types of commercial uses so that they're not the ones that we would worry about being next to residential, or having some kind of minimum lot sizes that are different, or maybe this is only for multiple family residential. This is more of our high density, larger, because we've got larger lots, maybe they could accommodate that more. There's one pathway to go down there. And then another one would be, do we just change what we allow in CI to make residential development easier for folks to do, and let the market kind of dictate where that makes sense and where it doesn't? So
That's the way I would lean.
So is that actually, well, I would too, but is that easier? Is that actually easier to say, we could move residential to be a principal use, right? We could do that. And then eliminate, and then we wouldn't have to eliminate anything. If we made that a principal use, that might solve it.
I'm concerned a
Within the
little bit
CI.
about, in a recent dialogue,
Yeah.
a gentleman or business that bought in the commercial industrial for the use of painting and spraying, bought that lot specifically because he was worried about chemicals and spray and overspray and fumes for residents. Seems a little bit unfair to just all of a sudden move in neighbors on those properties.
Well, there are already performance standards related to that. So that was his concern, and that's great. There are already performance standards on the books that he has to meet. So that would probably mitigate that in terms of anybody else would move in, and anybody else moving in would know they're moving into a commercial industrial district.
I really don't like to completely rely on that strategy,
Okay.
and for two reasons. One, people don't know. They don't do their homework all the time.
Okay.
And oftentimes, they end up getting into a situation because they really don't have any options. And then finding out there are these conflicts that they don't really like, and then they're going to come and complain and look for some assistance with. So I wouldn't count on people avoiding it on their own. But more importantly, we're really not equipped to do a lot of review and enforcement of performance standards. So although they're on the books, what our strategy has been, and ours being not this people in this room, but the city and the community for many, many decades, is take for granted that we don't have these things in proximity to each other and creating problems. But if we were going to make that our strategy, don't have them in proximity, that's kind of the whole idea of zoning in the first place.
Right.
Then I would think this zone here, this CI, where there are a lot of really industrial type commercial uses is very different than this zone over here where there's one very industrialish type use and a couple of other not industrial commercial uses, office spaces and hotels and.
But because they are zoned the same, you can't just have the western CI zone has different rules than the eastern CI zone, right?
Well,
I mean,
you could completely create a new
That's what
zone.
I'm saying, yeah.
Yeah. And
So
so
that-
maybe that would be, well, maybe we could do both, like create a new zone on the west side and then on the east side, we could get rid of, well, I mean, it wouldn't do everything, but it would do some to help if we eliminate the 50-foot setback.
So what I think you were bringing up is, let's say we do eliminate the 50-foot setback, let's say we do make it easier for residential and commercial to be close in proximity.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily good for the commercial either.
Okay.
And I've always thought that, in the business park there, we do allow some residential uses up there right now. The EDA has asked for that, and they're gonna come and ask for more
Mhm.
in the near future. And I've thought, well, if I was Pete running the operation he is up there, I don't want any neighbors. I'm trying to get away from people as a courtesy, but also just because the type of thing that I'm doing, which is absolutely necessary for everybody, is not something that folks necessarily want to live next to.
Right.
I mean, I think
No,
the
fair
goal is, we want to support residential housing, right?
Yes.
But I think the priority at the same time needs to be supporting the people that have purchased land and are using them.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, totally.
And not
Yeah.
impacting them negatively.
Yeah.
And using it.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
just
And
for
using
our
it.
quest to provide easier residential, We could provide easy residential, it doesn't mean these are gonna be developed with houses, right?
Yeah.
We haven't even talked to the landowners,
No,
right? We have no idea.
no idea.
Yeah.
What we know is that the community needs housing,
Mhm.
and this could be a place where it might fit. But that doesn't mean it will. That's right. That doesn't mean somebody will decide to do it.
Yeah, but right now, we don't have enough places for people to even consider having
Right.
residential. So there is a need. I think, I don't see why we couldn't separate out part of this for residential use and just do the spaces we think or we can determine would be the best. And maybe leave the rest of it alone, but that would give the okay. I mean, if somebody's got property and that's commercial and they're not using it, what would be the argument for changing it to residential? I mean, what would be the argument against it?
Well, they may not want it, right, residential, they may.
But maybe they would like to sell the property and make some money on it.
Well, yeah,
They're not gonna sell
maybe they, yeah.
a commercial lot like the large one up there
Maybe
as,
none of them are for sale at all.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think the only thing.
the issue, yeah.
Yeah, I
That's
think the
the
only thing
problem.
we'd really be doing is, just like we did when we changed up the rules about how, development density within the city. And I think in the same way, we're just putting out something to encourage it. We can't make it happen. We can't make people sell properties and whatever.
we could invite people to
But-
speak to us.
Well, I think,
If we want to create any changes in the rules, that is an early step that we need to do.
Because, we're sitting here, we don't know if these people would be open to it or not. And, if there's a chunk that could be used and they don't object, then there's no reason for us to worry about it.
I have another question. Okay, talking about how much land are in each of the west and the east.
Mm-hmm.
What percentage of that land is currently developed for commercial? What percentage is used for residential? on
Right.
in both of those, because I'm thinking, saying, well, we want more commercial to be out there, well, it kind of looks like we already have lots of residential out there. Do you really want to say, we want more industrial-type businesses to move in where we already have quite a,
Are you talking
Bit of-
about this side or this side?
I'm talking about the east side, it
Yeah.
looked, I get what you're saying, we want to make sure we keep spots for commercial.
I think
But
there's
is
less
this-
vacant on the east side. I think there's a lot more already developed on the east side.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure that what we would be saying is we want more commercial uses here. I think what we're saying is because there are already so many, maybe there's less, maybe it's less appropriate for residential uses to go in the middle of all these. And it's an open question, you know, it's just something to think about.
But they can with a CUP.
You could, with conditional use permit.
Yeah.
So if you like this line of reasoning, this idea that maybe there is a potential for residential development in the CI, and maybe what it would take is a new zone or a modification of the zoning rules, I think we're going to need some help to put this together. So, you know, some research and a few maps is, you know, 8 to 10 hours of staff time. But to think about, well, what are all the options that we've got for what a new zone might look like, and let's get some meetings put together and talk to these folks. And I would be interested in giving our friends at HKGI a call back and saying, hey, let's put a proposal together for the Planning Commission to look at, to just kind of dig a little deeper into this issue.
We
Yeah.
have all this commercial property that, in my opinion, much of it is not being used, especially on the west side. And we have the park where we were supposed to put all the commercial property. And so it's not like we're losing places for commercial property.
Right.
Yeah.
So when we do a rezoning request, there's a series of questions that you need to make findings about. And one of them is that we need more of the type of zoning that they're asking to zone it to. And I think it's hard to say we need more commercial zoning, but pretty easy to say we need more residential zoning. And it's not so that we don't have a lot of vacant residential. We've got plenty of residential zoned property that's also undeveloped. It's just also unserviced by water and sewer. Whereas if we look at both of these zones, they're serviced very well by water and sewer. And so that's where the difference would lie. Now, one of the other questions is, it's not just that we need more of that type of zoning, but this is the right place to do it. So we have to find that there's something about this particular location that serves that need more than a different one. And so when we looked at the question over here, I mean, we never got to the findings part, but because of that setback rule, it was clear that this was not the right place to put more residential zoning right in the middle of this. Now, maybe there would have been different findings if that setback didn't exist, and maybe it would have moved forward. So it could be as simple as that. Like, let's not overthink this if we just want, we can make one easy, let's allow residential uses in this zone, and let's get rid of the 50-foot setback, and then we can be done and just see what happens. But if we want to be a little more thoughtful, a little more careful, a little more in-depth about it, then I think we need to get some help.
I mean, I wonder, sales of some of these empty lots, if it was kept commercial, but we allowed houses, residential, there also, would we have somebody who wants to put up a building and live there at the same time on your parcel, because you can afford to do both things on this parcel? That would be a
Yeah.
argument for making,
100%. I think that there's a huge demand in the EDA's business park for that particular use, which is why they're going to come back and ask us about it. I suspect that has as much to do with the price of land up there as anything else, and which is artificially lowered.
Yes.
If you looked at this property over here, it's privately held. If you're allowed to build a commercial and residential use, you still have to buy the land, and it's not going to cost $15,000 or $30,000. It's going to cost a lot more. So I'm not sure if it would work, but we know that there's demand for it, absolutely.
So I guess that's where I would think maybe we need to change the setbacks then instead of creating a new zone. I don't know.
Well, that, it would take the setbacks, but more importantly, it would take making it easier to build residential, at least some kinds of residential, in this commercial zone. So if you wanted to have it be that type of owner-occupied, I mean, there's plenty of those in town.
And then I think we
right?
run into the same problem we had before, though, that we were just talking about in terms of businesses being like, well, but I have this business, you know,
Yeah.
I've got my paint business.
I'm not
or
a
whatever.
fan
You know,
of that,
Stacy,
yeah.
I think it would be better serving the community if we could create new residential areas. Now, if they wanted to be able to have a business in their home, that's another issue, but I don't like the idea of mixing commercial business, you know. I
guess I don't have a
think we
problem
need
with
more
that, so
residential
Thinking
area.
other places. Maybe it's because I grew up with.
Yeah. It's
I
very
lived here and this was the business.
Well,
right here.
yeah.
So that's.
But I
And
think-
I
I
did
don't have a
not,
problem with
so,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think though, as we're, you know, going forward though, we are, you know, like, I can easily see moving the west into a different zone more than the east side. Like, the east side does have the density already going, you know, it feels that way when you're there, but when you're coming up here, it's like, you know, well, I'm not sure. I mean, it could be, it might be when you're just driving by, and if you don't know, you could see it both ways on that end. And it's just less developed in general. But
Mike,
then-
you know, in this case, I mean, we haven't talked to the landowners,
Oh, yeah, no.
owners, whatever. you
Not
know,
at
I mean,
all. Yeah.
nobody's in disagreement that we would like to promote more residential, but this isn't our property we're talking about. It's not city property, so,
Except for that piece.
except for that, right.
There.
So you can do it, yeah, we do residential.
Which is not going anywhere.
But would it be, I mean, I can't imagine us being in a position if 3 out of the 5 landowners said, no, we're like, we want this exactly the way it is and don't mess with it.
I would think we'd
Oh.
look somewhere else.
Yeah, we would just walk away, like, okay.
So my question is, can we start with the conversation before
Yeah.
we get everybody working on plans to rezone it?
Yeah, I think there's pros and cons to the timing of when we do that conversation.
Okay.
I mean, the earlier the better, except the more informed the better.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we've got enough information to ask the question in a useful way. And if we ask it in the wrong way, it just reflexively, people don't understand and they're worried and they don't like change and they're just gonna say no.
Yeah.
If we ask it in a way that can really explain how some of their concerns might be dealt with, maybe it's a yes. So I think it's worth spending a little bit of time developing our ideas before we go ask the question. You know, not a year and not $20,000, but a couple $1,000s and, you know, a couple 20 hours of some consultant's time to just put a few ideas together that we can present to folks.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a reasonable first step, and, yeah. Because I agree, like, we're not gonna, you know, run after it if nobody, you know, if they're not interested. It's
Can't
like,
do
yeah,
that.
that's, we're going somewhere else.
Yeah.
I mean,
And I just don't,
And
I don't
there's
think it's
not
gonna
really
happen.
anywhere to go, but, right?
I mean, look at this zone here has 15 property owners, right? I mean, there's not a million people right here. There's some of these properties are kind of consolidated into joint ownership.
Yeah.
And a lot of those folks are living there. So I'd be surprised if there was that instant no from a lot of them.
Okay.
So I think we better be ready to have a good conversation about, well, what might this look like?
Yeah. And really, yeah, ask them, like, how could you see more residential happening in the area that you're in? Like, how could that happen?
Yeah.
Because they probably have some great ideas.
Good approach.
Was there any attachment to this 50-foot setback, or should I start drafting some ordinance language for you to look at at an upcoming meeting to make it go away?
I say we let that go for sure.
So, in order to do that, we'll have a public hearing, right?
Yeah.
We'll publish notice that we're gonna do it, we'll put the word out that we're talking about it, there'll be a public hearing. Maybe somebody's gonna show up, but it doesn't seem like the sort of issue that is gonna garner a lot of attention from people. You know, it's very different when we knock on somebody's door 3 times and say, you need to know about this, this is happening, this setback's going to occur on your property, as opposed to taking it away, and again, it's like that absence of something they're not gonna really notice.
Right. So will notice be sent to the people in those districts, though?
We probably won't mail notice to folks, we'll probably just
Okay.
publish notice, since it's such a wide,
And it's not really,
Um,
it's not really affecting.
but I'll have to talk to Chris about that.
But it is
Chris is our
citywide,
city
right?
attorney, it's
Well,
not.
it'll just be those zones.
It's
And-
all of our commercial zones.
Right, all
And
of
so that's why I think we probably don't mail notice to people, because I think that
It's
it's
too
so
many.
broadly
Yeah.
affecting folks that we probably, there isn't a group that needs to get notified as much as
Got it.
just everybody.
So to back
If-
up, you're proposing eliminating completely any setback resulting from a residentially zoned property adjacent. That's what we're talking about.
That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So that, just saying that we want to look at that doesn't mean it's going to happen. And during the public hearing and while we're thinking about it, there may be some changes to that idea that need to occur. Like, well,
Yeah.
do we need to, let's look at our performance standards, let's talk about our screening requirements, let's make sure that the real obvious conflicts can be dealt with in other ways. But it seems like most cities are really not doing it anything like we're doing it.
Shouldn't we ask the landowners who are zoned residential right now who abut the commercial areas?
Well, they're gonna-
See, that's gonna change their
It is, yeah.
land.
Yeah.
Well,
And we'll have the
On both
hearing and they
sides.
can
Yeah.
come and talk, right?
So now, commercial properties can build right up to the boundary of that residential zoning.
Well, not in most of our zones, they can't go right up to the boundary. The downtown commercial zones don't have a setback,
Okay.
and that's true in this mixed-use zone too, right? All this blue doesn't have a setback, and the only place where there's a conflict are these blocks here, where you've got the mixed-use and R1 on the same block, but these are all built out, so there isn't gonna be that concern down here. This is gonna be a lot more of like the headstrom question. I'm gonna put a entryway on my existing single-family home that's being used commercially, and it's inside the 50-foot setback. Well, I mean, we haven't really ever said no to those. It just doesn't seem to be an issue. But to think about, all right, where are all the places where a commercial property and a residential property abut? Well, it's a lot. A good chunk of the town is affected by this change. And again, I don't know that sending a notice to people is really, go back to your earlier conversation about notices, right? How do we explain to people what this means to them? And honestly, I don't have an answer to that. It seems like it means something very different to different people. And to go and to look at each individual lot and decide where's the potential conflict here, and how do we talk about what might happen or what might, it just is too complex at that point.
Well, if we had the hearing, each person could ask those questions and we would have to have some answers for them.
We would. And maybe it's just my moderately cynical nature about public hearings, but I don't expect anybody to come,
Okay.
even if we do a great job of getting notice out, because I don't know that the issue is relevant enough to people's current day existence that
Well,
they're
it
going to
was
show up.
relevant on the Anna Hamilton 4 homes. Those people objected.
And the folks that showed up at the meeting to object, we made sure that they knew about the meeting, right?
Yeah.
And so when we do have, there's only a handful of people that are directly affected, we do try to do a little extra work. But when it's 500 people, we can't knock
Yeah.
on all their doors and talk to them about it, right?
Right,
And I
right.
think most of them, this is going to be kind of that low simmer or just no issue at all. And why would they take time out of their lives to come and talk to us when it's not?
Should we be doing a PSA on WTIV?
Well, we'll put notice out. I mean, I think that even if we do great notice, and even if we have, let's buy some TV time, and let's the best job we could possibly do, my suspicion is this isn't the big deal to folks. And so
Okay.
they won't come. So then we just have to think about, all right, what are the issues? How, are they mitigated with other spots in our zoning ordinance? Are we confident of that?
Yeah.
Stacy? You're pretty quiet.
I'm still thinking.
Yeah.
Good. Well, the
Well-
point of this was just to start this conversation that we've threatened to have for a while. And if I'm reading the room correctly, I am going to call Jeff and say, let's talk about a scope of work for looking at some of these changes and bring it back to you. So that's the kind of timing that we would have, is come back and look at a scope of work. We're not writing up anything. We're not calling anybody to talk about residential and commercial. This will be 6 months of working on it. And, maybe it'll be ready before next construction season. And then the other issue is we'll get an ordinance drafted up for you to look at your next meeting that says we're getting rid of the 50-foot setback. And we'll schedule a public hearing at your next meeting. The hearing won't be at your next meeting. We'll schedule the hearing at your next meeting. So that'll also be a couple months out. There won't be any big rush on any of it.
Yeah.
Does that-
People have plenty of time
Does that make sense? Does that
Yeah.
sound like what we want to do?
to.
Yeah?
Okay.
Unless that's moving too fast.
The
for you.
yellow downtown district, is there issues there? Do we need to,
No.
because there's some residential in there too, right?
Well, really all three of
Yeah.
those districts have some intermixing. There's more in the yellow than the blue, or the red, and then there's more in the blue than the yellow. I'm not sure that we've got the same issues. I kind of think that it's been managed with the way those zones are written, that we allow more residential uses in the blue and, more in the yellow than the red. So I don't think we need to look at those.
Okay.
And they're pretty well built out at this point.
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
the
they're
other
not gonna
thing
be
is
losing 50 foot anywhere, I don't think.
Yeah.
There isn't, well, I
Yeah.
can't think of
I can't.
a spot in here where you might say, well, I mean, maybe the Schulte's lot is undeveloped, right? Maybe this one's underdeveloped. So there is a few, and there's downtown stuff too that's undeveloped or underdeveloped. But I think there's already a path for those owners to do residential uses if they want to.
Okay.
Like that lot that is on Broadway, across the street from 8 Broadway. That's for sale, commercial.
Here.
Oh,
Oh,
you're
yeah.
talking about right over here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right adjacent to our parking lot.
I mean, yeah, that,
You could have our parking attendant live there.
but I mean, it's a size that could be residential, right? I
I'm
don't know,
not-
see, I'm confused about the size.
But we allow residential over
Commercial.
commercial there, so
Yeah,
residential is.
downtown, we want to see commercial but not lodging on the main floor.
Yeah.
And residential, if they want to do it, above as well, so
Okay, so that would stay commercial then.
probably.
I see, okay.
And there's no minimum sizes downtown, there's no setbacks downtown, so. All right, well, keep those wheels churning.
All right.
Great.
I call this meeting adjourned. Woo.